who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Your life in such a way that you're always saying to it, is that a good way to conduct things? Or do you want to live your life in such a way that you say, come on, let's go. You see, let's swing this thing. On the one hand, you see, you're always in tension against it. Do you remember I pointed out to you in this morning that a person who's anxious, constantly anxious, is the person who is resisting the flip-flopability of things. Life is vibrating, it's going bloop, 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 bloop all the time. The anxious person says, God's sake, don't do that. Because, you know, you might do it too much. I don't want to blurp like this, it makes me feel nervous. Just stop it. And so, as he puts his weight on this blip, blip, he goes like this, you see, it gets tripping. So instead of saying, come on, let's blip, see, let's go, and do this thing. So in exactly the same way, the person who wants to say, well, you're nothing but some kind of chemicals, and they're just a lot of, you're a bag of pus and blood, basically, with a few bones inside. And that person is doing the same thing, you see, as the person is putting pressure on the flip-flopability of things, and so he gets anxious. And the person who does this, he wants to say, he's always, look, think about your friends and the people who are philosophical and enthusiastic materialists. They're always going to pose themselves as a certain kind of hero. After all, you're just a dreamer, but I face facts. See? I'm a hard-headed realist. And as a matter of fact, I'm an intellectual porcupine. I have my prickles out all over the place. Because I'm the kind of person who, in the academic world at any rate, is full of rigor. I ask, what precisely is the evidence about this? And I'm analytical. And believe in, I don't like bully and vague thinking. I like it clear cut. And you can see that true that the gooey people are always trying to make out that it's only goo, and the prickly people are always trying to make out it's only prickles. Now we do need both, see? But the question is fundamentally which game works better. The game that resists the vibration, the flip-flop, or the game that goes with it. Obviously the game that goes with it, that cooperates with the general scene, will be a longer game and a more amusing game than one that totally resists it. Although, I said totally, advisedly, because it's great fun to resist it at times. See? It's just like, when somebody massages you, they're really expert at those fingers are just vibrating like this on your back. You can give and just go woof. But it's also fun sometimes to tighten yourself, your muscles against it, so as to feel the full impact of this thing, see? But what I want to, the real point I want to get across is that what seems to us the hard-boiled common sense of a mechanistic view of the universe is nothing other than this. You don't have to be taken in balance, because there is no more solid argument that that is the way things are than any other argument about any other way things might be. Now, it goes like this, you see. Again, think of the idea of limits. We'll take different limits this time. We'll take one limit on the right hand here, extreme, lively sensitivity. And on the other hand, we'll take the opposite limit, which is geological, the stone, the blind energy, the electrical force without any consciousness whatsoever. These are observable things. We see the living human being on one extreme, and we see the stone or the fire on the other. Now, our 19th century mythologist wants to describe this limit in terms of this one. He wants to say that consciousness is nothing but a very complicated form of minerals. Why can't you go the other way and just as easily say minerals are a very simple form of consciousness? That works, doesn't it? I mean, after all, here is this mineral. I knock it, and it says that to me.
As something definitely there, so that you could say it has properties. Take another case of space, which is rather startling. There are different kinds of space. Space is basically, isn't it, an interval? There is an interval between each one of us sitting here. If we didn't have that, we would suffocate by being packed together like sardines. We need space in order to function as a human being. We need a kind of area in which to gesture and move and walk about and breathe and express ourselves. Now, you can have intervals not only in space but in time. Pauses are intervals. You can also have intervals in sound, the intervals between tones or notes. And the interesting thing about the intervals between tones is that they are that upon which the hearing of melody depends. Melody is here. To hear melody is to hear intervals. Now, if you will simply visualize melody in terms of something graphic, supposing you represent a simple, say, introduction of a fugue. You can see that in terms of a dancing line. or a series of points at different levels representing, like musical notation, the high ones and the low ones. And you will recognize a pattern. But you see at once that the pattern depends on the way the critical dots in it are spaced. And it doesn't matter much whether the space is a big space or whether it's a little one, because it will always be relative to the size of the dots, magnified or minified. But you will see it is the way they are spaced that makes the difference. And here once again we are using spaced as a transitive verb. We've talked about spaces or distances increasing, or people increasing a distance. Now we can talk about space as a verb. To space, to be spaced. And so once again the language is either playing tricks on us, or else expressing a profound intuition. Language does both. You have to watch out for which it is, because it may be both. But here at once you see, especially in that illustration of music, of it being necessary to hear intervals in order to hear melody. You see that the way things are spaced is really another way of talking about the way things are related. So you begin to realize that space is relationship. Go further now. There is another idea about space which is connected with all the Oriental uses of space. It is quite fundamental to Indian and a great deal of Chinese thinking that space equals consciousness. In other words, what actually we are experiencing as the all-inclusive space in which things happen is your mind. And your mind, of course, is not something inside your head. That is a great mistake to make. Your head is something in your mind. We can define a person's mind in many ways, but beginning with something rather simple, mind is occupied with thinking. Most people think in words, and you didn't get words out of your head. You got them from the community in which you live and were brought up. So when you think in a language which your community gave you, you are not really thinking your own thoughts. It is very difficult indeed to have private thoughts, because when the very materials with which you think are public property, it shows what a vast influence the public has on you in the deepest recesses of your mind. It's therefore very difficult also to think freely, independently, because we are pushed around with the symbolic systems of words or of numbers in which we think. But since you see the functioning of the mind in the process of thinking depends upon an outside community, you begin to see that your mind is a network of relationships. You think only in the context of an environment of people and of natural processes. So that you could say that your mind is at the very least a most complex network of present past relationships, stretching out to the very limits of the universe.
Money value, even fame, fame may bring more worry, more anxiety, more stress, more suspicion. Friend also, just a mere friend. I think in most cases, friend of wealth, friend of power. You may get more suspicion. These kind of genuine human friend comes if you put 100% trust on them, respect them, take care of them, then they become genuine friend. That's a reliable friend. And day to day must be happy. Money alone cannot be. Power again in a vacuum. So vision with value and individually a happier person, at a family level also happier, and community level also much happier. Certain values based on faith. Faith towards something mysterious. So long it works, okay, very good. But not very sound. But value means humanism, basic human kind, human nature, I believe, gentleness. I think when we are very young, maybe more fresh, basic human nature. So they love play. Occasionally some quarrel. But most cases, the parent, particularly the mother, provides affection, compassion. The children themselves doesn't care what the children's social background, family background, so on. The children affection. These are express very, very alive. These are nature. Logically, we are social animals. So individuals, happy life, successful life, entirely depend on the rest of the community. So the rest of the community is source of our future, source of one individual's positive success or happiness. So we have to take that on daily from them. Rest of care. Not the soil, but that is their future. Their income, money come from that soil. So similarly, individual happy life depend on other. So that others are basis or source of our fortune. So it's taking care of them. It's a more natural way, nature sort of way. Right? I think artificial sort of thinking, I'm independent. I never depend on them. Then exploit, cheating, lying, bully. In reality, long run, you are cutting or destroying basis of your own future. So humanism, basic human nature is more gentleness. Gentleness not come from dullness. Right? Gentleness come from full alert mind, sharp mind, more balance with warm-heartedness. Then real human gentleness come. So these not come from God or not come from the sky or whatever, not come from within. So that's humanism. Well, I think some sort of, because of that, some way to look, that's humanism. We are social animals. It's bound to have different views, different sorts of interests. But still, these different people who have different sort of idea, different sort of interest, they are part of humanity, part of society. So there's no reason to killing each other, to bully each other. Even there are some differences, we have to talk. So that's the principle of non-violence. Non-violence does not mean non-violence, you should consider non-violence is signs of strength. Violence is a sign of desperate weakness. So it is a very rich human thinking, the concept of ahimsa.
Your body and your reality. So it is inherently that you exist in your body and reality. Actually, technically, exists within your consciousness, nothing of which. Therefore, your body is at the center of the understanding that lays down a foundation and also lays down a set actually create your own reality or again by extension you are not is a reality is not that distinct from what you call waking up in the morning from when you are within your sleep, you are engaged in the of feeling, It is real while you are no one while you are except perhaps being from congruity, physically can yet when you wake up, realize, well, I guess that reality is actually in and this is direct analogy to how your higher self brings your physical self into reality. Literally, therefore, when you quote-unquote die or transform from this particular place, you have a similar realization, a similar that the very reality that you used to exist within actually exists. This is at least the sense of the life that analogy. You are conscious. The expression of your consciousness is your physical reality. Your consciousness is totally connected to your physical reality. You are not disconnected from God or all that, and you are not disconnected from your soul or higher realization that the truth has always been that you are exploring seeming disconnection, but are truly connected. You are always an expression of all that is. You are always an expression of your higher self. No exception. There are particular signs, perhaps you can say, that your higher self will bequeath or send to your physical self, allowing you to align, allowing you to realign to the purposes of that higher self. The particular vibratory translation that we are is what you refer to as the psyche. For our definition of the psyche is the vibratory energy that tells you in no uncertainty that the thing that you are excited about is most used from what is available in the situation. Your willingness to use that excitement as a prompter, to use that excitement to validate the message from your higher self by acting upon that thing that excites you with integrity. Creates the life that you say that you do. Now we do at this point make the distinction of acting upon your excitement with integrity and understand that when we say integrity, we mean integrity as coming from the word integration, which is a realization, not a moral standard. The realization that everything does exist within you, by extension, can also be taken to prove that everything is all one thing, one event. Therefore, one integrated, interwoven, synchronistic reality. Your willingness to begin to look at it that way and act as though it is reflected on, act as though everything is a reflection of it. Acting in that manner, from that orientation, is from the perspective of integration with integrity. So when you are looking at the things that excite you, truly understand that you have all the power you need to create anything that you desire or are excited about without harming yourself or someone else. For again, someone else is simply a reflection of you anyway. And if you are treating everything that you interact with as an extension of yourself and affording that degree of respect to everything, your actions always then express your knowingness that you contain that degree of power. Perhaps there is the appearance that stepping over the heads of others to get what you want is a powerful expression. But it is truly from our perspective and understanding the expression of helplessness, powerlessness, not believing that you actually have enough power to do it without harming someone else. One person winning at the expense of another is simply one truth, one reality. It is not the only truth or the only reality. And what we commonly refer to as win-win situations are another truth, another reality. So therefore, you have that degree of power to create your own reality. If you begin to be
x2 times x3. Now we're going to have something very subtle. Now the exponential, remember that if these were numbers, we know how to take the product exponential. You just add the entries. But because these are matrices, this is a matrix, this is a matrix, and this is a matrix, the product of this exponential is not going to be given by the exponential of the sum. You have to be very, very careful. This is what is called the Baker-Campbell-Hausdorff formula. In the next slide, I'll talk about that. But notice that when I work this out and I do all the algebra, what I'm going to get is this, okay? So I'm going to have cosine theta, by theta means the norm of the angle, of the net angle, the unit matrix. I'm going to have the product of theta 1 times theta 2, and I'm going to have this. So what does it mean physically? So you're going to have, along the diagonal, you're going to have a cosine theta times 1, because the unit matrix is made out of 1, 1, 1 along the diagonal. You have cosine theta, because this is the second element along the diagonal. Cosine theta is the third element along the diagonal. When you look at this term here, I'm going to have 1 minus cosine theta, which is had here, 1 minus cosine theta. So when the matrix element is 1, when I combine 1 with 2, I have, this is the matrix element, which is the 1, 2 matrix element, which is phi 1 times phi 2. Here I have phi 1, phi 3, because the matrix entry is the 1, 3 matrix entry. You know? Here I have 2, 1, because the matrix entry is the 2, 1 matrix entry. Here I have 2, 3, 3, 1, 3, 2. And here, when I have phi 1, phi 1, I have phi squared. This is the matrix element, the 2, 2 matrix element, so I get this. This is the 3, 3 matrix element, so this is what I get. And finally, I have this combination here. This is the most subtle term. Remember when you take vector products, remember when you took the vector product, remember when you take the vector product of, remember when you study vector analysis, vector calculus, you have the scalar product of two vectors compared to the vector product of, you know. So when you have, this is all, by the way, this is in your book. Yeah, this is in the book. This is the book. Yeah. So imagine you take this I can write here. Let me see. When you take vector number 1, vector number 2, remember you take the epsilon symbol. Remember 1, 2, 3. This is the cross product. When you take the cross product of vectors, remember A cross B gives you a vector, right? So by the epsilon symbol, remember what it meant is the permutation symbol. The epsilon. Remember when the permutation is even, it's a +1. When the permutation is odd, it's -1. And when the entries are repeated, you get a 0. Okay? So 1 through 3 is a positive permutation, it's an even permutation. So you get a +1. So this is why you get a 3 here. And we know that, you know, when you take the cross product of this unit vector with this vector here, you generate this vector. Remember when you use the thumb rule of vectors? So when you take the cross product of the vector along the x-axis with the unit vector along the y-axis, you generate the vector. The rule of thumb, remember? So this is why you're going to end up having this term here. You know, this is what it means. I have vector number 1 with vector number 2. The cross product is going to give me vector number 3. And this is why you get this phi 3. Here, for example, okay, you're going to have vector number 1 with vector number 3 is going to give you vector number 2. For example, when you have 2 cross E3, okay, you're going to have 2, 3, 1. No, here, sorry, it's actually 1. And in the first row, sorry. Okay. And then you have vector 2. Now this is an odd permutation. Because it's an odd permutation, it carries a negative sign. So you have minus E2. So this is the reason there is a minus here. Okay? Now when you do that with each entry of your matrix element, you know, you generate this whole matrix. You know? And it's in your book. Yeah, it is in page 1 to 5. If you go to page 1 to 5 of the book, I guess it's the same edition. If you look at equation 1.23, you'll find that 3 by 3 matrix. Okay, you found it? All of you found it? Okay, so this is what I did. So I was just explaining to you more detail, how do you get that 3x3 matrix? Okay? Yeah. Well, I'm glad you have the book. It's very okay, and how do you test that this is correct? Well, let's suppose that you set two of the angles to 0, and the other angle not 0, and then you'll be able to generate the rotation along the x or y or z axis, So you could actually, for simplicity, imagine that you set phi1 to 0 and phi2 to 0, okay? So let's say that we set phi1 to 0, so you kill this term here. You also kill this term here. And phi3 is the only angle remaining, okay? Let's suppose that you kill this, you kill this, you kill this, you kill most of them.
Expands more rapidly, way more rapidly, than the idea you call the speed of light, which compared to the idea of infinite consciousness is very, very slow. So, let all this begin to sink in at whatever rate, in whatever way you need to. If you wish to listen to the recording again a few times, it's up to you. If you think you've got it, that's fine. Just let it sink in and let it reveal itself to you at whatever rate your belief system is comfortable in becoming aware of these ideas, and use them as you wish. Use them as you desire. Use them as you prefer. They are tools that you can apply in your physical reality. These awarenesses are tools you can apply in your physical reality and get an effect. Remember, what you in your reality have now more recently called the law of attraction, what we in our reality call the third law, is what you put out is what you get back. It's as simple as that, but simply remember that what you're getting back is nothing but a reflection. You are the prime cause in your life. Nothing else controls you. Nothing else can. Nothing else has the power to. Only by your agreement can you be affected by anything anyone else offers you, be it positive or negative. Only by your agreement. Whether it be unconscious or conscious, only by your agreement can you co-experience anything similar to what another individual is choosing to experience. So it's completely in your hands. It's completely up to you. You are completely self-empowered beings. Therefore, all of this simply comes to you by way of information that works for us in our reality that we know can work for you in your reality, but it's up to you to decide whether or not you prefer to take it in and use it in that way. If you do not, it's up to you. Because we love you unconditionally and must allow you to decide what is true for you.
Allow your imagination to lay down the template of how it personally would prefer to act, and simply act that way. That is what we do anyway, though unconscious. We are now beginning to speak about making it conscious, allowing it to be conscious, making the new determination and consciously choosing to manifest the new idea. You will immediately notice that the actions of the preferred belief will differ from the actions you have been taking. So it'll be quite obvious in that regard that you will obviously get a different effect. But what your imagination is doing is showing you that you contain within you that preferred belief already. And that is why you can even project how a person would act who has it. And that means because you already contain it, you already are in the moment you are conjuring it up, that it will be most effortless to simply act that way. When you stop yourself from the automatic, sometimes label that you have, and give yourself an alternative, the alternative being that it is a reflection of the new preferred will most obviously seem more attractive. Therefore, it will be most effortless to do the new preferred. And if you will simply give yourself the advantage of the opportunity to see what that would be, there will not be much difficulty in choosing the action that is truly reflective of the growing and active way to begin to take back create your reality in a conscious way reality is within you. Nothing is separate from you. And your willingness to view all things, all events, all individuals as part of you in some way, significant to you, part of the creation of your reality, is the understanding of your integration with all things. When we speak of acting with integrity, this is what we mean. Acting as though you are integrated with all things. Allow us again, before we begin to exchange the interaction, briefly note that one of the ways that your higher self, so to speak, allows your physical self to be aware of what will benefit you most in a given situation, translate as a particular emotional vibration that you call excitement. Anything that moves you, anything that gives you joy, anything that brings your passion to the person and excites you in that way is a reflection from your higher self that this is you. If you are willing to begin to get in touch with what excites you, with integrity, again, an extension of your understanding of integration, you will begin to hear your life where you are. For the things that excite you do not do so to please you. They do not do so to go, as we sometimes say, nah, or dangle for calories. They are the vibratory representation of what you chose to be in this life. Very often individuals will say, give me the sun, I wish I had sun. Excitement is that is your specific game. That is your indication. This is you. That is why it's and not someone else. It is your game. And again, when acting upon any opportunity within that excitement, utilizing the knowledge of inspiration within your life, you will always find a positive result.
Distrust. Distrust brings frustration. So therefore, and fear. Then the lonely feeling automatically comes. So lonely feeling is not creation of environment, but creation of your own mental attitude.
But the thought leader says there is hope if only we could seek a slightly different goal.
I think eventually we can develop more deeper sort of experience about our life. Make some kind of pledge. Now on, I must make a new person. Same body, but new person.
Your Holiness, I have to thank you so much. I have learned much from meeting you today. I have learned, for instance, that we're all on the same road.
Yes.
With the ultimate goal.
That's right.
But we're all different travelers.
And also same experience of gas.
I don't think I'll ever forget this day.
Hi, I'm Mike Warsman, founder of A Million Smiles. To join our journey, please subscribe to our YouTube channel below and check us out on Facebook. And while you're there, you might like to leave a comment on your thoughts on Buddhism and happiness. Are they a match made in heaven or something else? And as always, please share this video with 10 friends who you think might get a smile out of it. Until next time, stay happy.
The mystery and meaning of the world. This occurs sufficiently often to have been made a subject of experimentation. Perhaps you know the story of the investigator who took doses of anesthetic for this purpose and equipped himself with pencil and paper to record at the moment of awakening whatever revelation might have been given to him.
eventually the expected experience took place. And for a brief period, the investigator had the vivid conviction of complete comprehension of this universe of life and death. He regained waking consciousness with the tail end of the sensation still upon him, grabbed the pencil, and swiftly recorded the essential content of the experience just before it faded. After several minutes, during which his mind returned to its normal state, he looked at what he had written. And there upon the paper was the following immensely profound observation. Everything in this universe is the smell of burnt almonds. I suppose that all sensible and hard-headed people would agree that this is just the sort of inanity to which all these mystical revelations ultimately come down. In the clear, cold light of rational consciousness, seemingly inspired and utter convincing knowledge of dreams, of drug delusions, and of mystical experiences comes down to just this sort of idiotic anticlimax. Masked in the poetic or exotic obscurantism of such phrases as all is Brahman or the divine unity beneath the multiplicity of the world, it may sound for a moment as if it meant something. But the essential nonsense of these feelings and the purely subjective character of the sense of insight which they involve at once becomes obvious when Brahman, the divine unity, is replaced by the smell of burnt almonds. We might settle for this conclusion if some of us had not had the same sensation, not under drugs or hypnosis, but when very wide awake. And I, for one, will not quarrel that the smell of burnt almonds is the key to the mystery. I like it much better than feeling which one was sin. So its very banality, its very consequential silliness, brings out the real significance of the experience of question. For the importance of the mystical revelation does not lie in the precise nature of what everything in this universe is. It can be God or endowment or applesauce or whatever you like. Its importance lies rather in the simple sensation of wholeness, in the part of the sentence which runs, everything in this universe is. For the conviction which has come to the experience is that his habitual sensation of isolation from his environment, from the rest of the world, is an illusion, and that as a corollary, his own deeds and misdeeds, fortunes and misfortunes, are the same process as the changing seasons and the circling stars. And unreasonable as it may seem, this gives him the sensation that his whole life, past, present, and future, simply like playing or listening to music, which is obviously phony in the very moment that we do it for some ulterior motive, such as to appear cultured or to convey an ideological message. Its significance for human beings is not like that of, say, the second law of thermodynamics, but like that of the Mozart sonatas or the arabesques on a Persian rug. The significance of useful knowledge, like the second law of thermodynamics, is precisely that by applying it, human beings may be enabled to go on experiencing such things as music or love or mystical insight. But what could I say to the woman who, under anesthetic, had once had this experience and wanted it again more than anything?
Stand into the definition of your angle.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
let's say that constant
Yeah.
is because of the physics that I'm doing, let's say
Yes. Yeah.
I can manufacture or I can extract a constant which is a small parameter in my problem that I'm working on.
Yes.
Let's
Yes.
say it's an epsilon, right?
Yes.
So if that is the case, so each of these matrices will be epsilon times whatever you have.
Yes.
That's all fine. Now
Yes.
let's go back to the
Yeah.
formula, the Baker-Hausdorff formula slide that you
Yeah.
have.
Yes. Okay. Here. Here, that t, that parameter, for example.
Yes, that exactly.
Yeah.
If that parameter is small,
Yeah.
I can get that the thing that you were asking us to be careful about.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have to worry.
No, you will kill this term,
I will kill the t squared.
and then you'll kill the t squared term. Yeah.
So the key is that as long as my t is not small,
Yeah.
we have to be careful.
Yes. Yes.
But if t is the small, then everything is fine.
Yes. 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 That's correct. That's correct. But to lead in order, this I will call to zeroth order. Will be to lead in order is t squared. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
does it arise somewhere in physics that
Oh.
you use that concept where you can manufacture the t to be small and forget about the non-commutativity?
Yeah, in some cases you do. Yeah, you see, because when t is very small, essentially you will recover.
The reason I'm
Yeah.
insisting on the t to be small is because you
Yeah.
said earlier in the slide that these are infinitesimally small rotations.
Yes.
To make that infinitesimally small, I need to make the t very small.
Yes.
So it seems to me
Yeah.
that should be the case.
Yes. In that, yeah. In that case, you will recover this matrix. The matrix, the Lie group will, in other words, the group element will collapse to the Lie algebra element, essentially. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Let me see. Let me think. Okay. Yeah, something crossed my mind, but anyway. Okay. Now I'm going to define what a Lie algebra is. A Lie algebra is nothing less than a vector space. A Lie algebra is just a linear vector space. That's all it is. Well, equipped with something extra, you know, with a binary operation which is called the Lie bracket. So a Lie algebra, think of it as a vector space, where you introduce an extra structure, which is called the Lie bracket, which is a binary operation, which it associates to any pair of Lie algebra elements. Remember, I am using lowercase. Little g means Lie algebra elements. Capital G means group elements. Little g is algebra elements. So when you have two algebra elements, the bracket operation will allow me to map. I have an operation between two Lie algebra elements. I will associate a third element, g. It's just what mathematicians call a binary operation, called a Lie bracket. Later we will see that this Lie bracket is nothing but the commutator of matrices, you know. But from the mathematical point of view, they call it. Okay, and this because Lie algebra is a vector space, it's a linear vector space. I have this binary operation. This Lie bracket is bilinear. You know, bilinear means that when I take a linear combination of two generators, X and Y are supposed two generators, A and B are elements of your field, because remember, a vector space, you need to specify over which field it is defined. It can be defined over the real numbers, for example, or the complex numbers. So whenever you have a vector space, you have a basis, but you need to tell me which is the field which is the vector space is defined on. So A and B are elements of your field. You know, A and B are elements of your field. It could be the real numbers, the complex numbers. So when you take a linear combination of X and Y are two generators, when you take a linear combination and you want to find the Lie bracket with another element of your Lie algebra, you have this linearity operation. So the bracket is linear, means when you have a superposition of two generators, and when you take the commutator, you have the superposition of your brackets. You know? So the bracket of a superposition is nothing but the superposition of brackets. You know? And the operation is bilinear because it can act both on your left or on your right-hand side. Okay, so this operation, the bracket must obey these actions. Its alternative, it means that when you take the bracket of X with itself, you get 0. And it has to do essentially with when you take the commutator of a matrix with itself, it's 0 because a matrix commutes with itself. And its anti-commutativity is that when you reverse the order, you will change the sign. Here, Yx, when you reverse the order, you change the sign. So the Lie bracket operation obeys these actions. So remember, a Lie algebra is nothing but a vector space endowed with a Lie bracket. That's what it is. In very simple words. Yeah, Fang, you were saying.
AX plus BX and then Z, and when it keeps on the right side, you have the Z times A times Z.
Here you see, remember, A and B are elements of your field, of your real numbers. And your generators of your algebra are X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z are your generators of your algebra. So here I have X commutator with Z, X with Z. Here I have Y with Z, Y with Z. Okay? And I can pull out A and B. I can pull them out because they are elements, they are real numbers or complex numbers. They are not elements of your algebra. Remember, the bracket is defined with respect to your elements of your algebra. The A are like constants.
Yeah, but the A is not in front of Z, though.
The
you take the A out of the X, Z, and that means you...
Yeah, but remember, you have AX, here, can I write it here? Yes. What happens is that, remember, A is a constant. Imagine X is a matrix. And I want to take the commutator with another matrix. Okay? So what do I have? I have, by definition,
that when we watch these movie clips of the CTC in Berlin 1900, the temporal cells are moving about the surface of things, and then disappearing. Temporal you, the person, and then there is the transcendent you, which is connected to the transcendent dimension of the universe. In some teachings it might be called the higher self. Consciousness, the conscious being that you are, because as you go within, you don't immediately dissolve into God. There's the non-physical being, the higher self, but then they're not divided. And then there's the transcendent dimension. don't normally use the term higher self because it makes you look upward, to look for you're looking for yourself. I'm getting a message from my higher self, it's coming through. A better expression might be your deeper self, deepening presence. And if you can sense, as you move away from here, this unchanging presence in you, then you can enjoy the short-lived nature of all things. You don't need to attach yourself to anything in particular. You can appreciate everything. You can honor everything. See the beauty and aliveness in everything without needing to attach yourself to anything. Attach means in some way it's linked to your sense of self. Then that creates the attachment. You can create things, enjoy the act of creation without attaching yourself either to the outcome or mentally projecting yourself forward to the outcome, or when you finally achieve the goal, attaching yourself to the goal and claim credit. Hide in there, look at me. Or as sometimes people go, yeah. A little bit of ego in there. If there's no ego, you create and then you step back.
Nature is purposeless.
So this non-attachment is something that comes
Matter is unconscious.
with being present as a natural
psychic phenomena are illusory.
Result of being present. You become less attached to outcomes, to achievements, to things, even to people. Although you can love. You love. There's a loving, an outflow of loving kindness, but not the clinging attachment. I love you, don't you ever leave me.
Biological
because you know it's going to happen then.
Memories are stored as material.
As I mentioned in a book, the Spanish for to love, te quiero, literally means I want you. It's the same word. And that's the normal word for I love you. That's a very honest way of saying it, because most love comes from the ego. It might have other elements mixed in with it, but most of that kind of love is egoic and can easily turn into its opposite. So it's not real love. It can turn into its opposite. I want you. In English it would sound strange. There's a poetic way in Spanish to say I love you, but not many people use it. Te amo. It's just like a poem. And it's beautiful. I want you. I really want to. You want me? As strongly as I want you. And so when wanting is thwarted and things happen, then anger is hatred spiritual teachings speak of the importance of non-attachment. But it's not really...
...you this evening on the subject of the spectrum of love. We know that from time to time there arise among human beings people who seem to exude love as naturally as the sun gives out heat. We would like to be like that, and by and large, man's religions are attempts to cultivate that same power in ordinary people. But unfortunately, they normally go about this task as one would attempt to make the tail wag the dog. I remember when I was a small boy in school, I was enormously interested in being able to do my schoolwork properly. And everybody told me that I didn't work hard enough and that I ought to work. I had an intense desire to do this, but when I asked, how do you work, everybody shut up like a clam. So I was extremely puzzled, but there were teachers who apparently knew how to work and had attained considerable heights of scholarship, and I admired them very much for their attainments. And so I thought that maybe I could learn the secret by copying their mannerisms. I would imitate the style of handwriting that they used. I would use the same kind of pen. I would affect the same mannerisms of speech and gesture, and insofar as I could get around the school uniform, even of clothing. I must assure you this, of course, was a private school in England, not a public school in America. But none of this revealed the secret, because I was, as it were, copying the outward symptoms and knew nothing of the inner fountain of being able to work. And exactly the same thing is true in the case of people who love. When we study the behavior of people who have the power of love within them, we can catalogue how they behave in various situations, and out of this catalogue formulate some rules. One of the peculiar things we notice about people who have this astonishing universal love is that they are apt, but not always so, but they are apt very often to play it rather cool on sexual love. The reason for this is, generally speaking, unknown to preachers, but it is because an erotic relationship with the external world operates, so far as they're concerned, between that world and every single nerve ending. Their whole organism, in all its aspects, physical, psychological, and spiritual, is an erogenous zone. And therefore, their flow of love is not specialized or canalized so exclusively in the genital system as it is with most other people. Especially in a culture such as ours, where for so many centuries, that particular expression of erotic love has been so marvelously repressed as to make it seem the most desirable kind of love that there is. And so we have, as a result of 2,000 years of Christianity, sex on the brain. It isn't always the right place for it. Of course, also, people who exude love are apt to give things away. They are, in every way, like rivers. They stream. And so when they collect possessions and things that they like, they are apt to give them to other people. Because if you ever notice that when you start giving things away, you keep getting more. The same way as you empty out, you create a vacuum, nature abhors a vacuum, and more flows in. So, noticing this, the codifiers of loving behavior write down that you should give so much money to tax-deductible institutions and to the poor, and that you should be nice to people, that you should act towards your relatives and your friends and indeed even your enemies as if you love them, even if you don't. And of course, for Christians and Jews and believers in God, there is a peculiarly difficult task enjoined upon us, namely, that thou shalt love the Lord thy God. And not only here, going through the motions of it externally, but with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And that is, of course, very demanding indeed. But you see what is happening. It is as if, for example, we admired the music of a certain composer, and having studied his style very thoroughly, we draw up rules of musical composition based on the behavior of this composer. We then go to send our children to music school, where they learn these rules, in the hope that if they apply them, they also will turn into first-class musicians, which they usually fail to do. Because what might be called the technique of music, as well as the technique of morals, as well as, say, the technique of speech, of language, is very valuable because it gives you something to express if, and I repeat, if you have anything to express. But if you don't have anything to say, not even the greatest mastery of English will stand you in good stead unless you can manage to fool your listeners by talking beautiful nonsense and make it sound profound. Now, so the question and the puzzle remains. You cannot imitate this thing. There is no way of getting it. And yet it is absolutely essential that we have it. Because obviously, the human race is not going to flourish harmoniously unless we are able to love each other. But the question is, how do you get it? Is it something you simply have to contract like music? Or is it value?
Money value, even fame, right? Fame may bring more worry, more anxiety, more stress, more suspicion. A friend also, just a mere friend, I think in most cases, friend of wealth, friend of power. You may get more suspicion from these kind of friend. Genuine human friend come only on the basis of warm-heartedness. If you treat them, if you put 100% trust on them, respect them, take care of them, then they become genuine friend. That's a reliable friend. And the day-to-day happy mood. Money alone cannot bring. Power, no. Again, inner value. So, vision with value, but now, individually, becoming a more happier person, and family level also happier, and community level also much happier. Certain values based on faith towards something mysterious. So long it works, okay, very good, but not very sound. But value means humanism, basic human kind, human nature, I believe, gentleness. I think when we are very young, maybe more fresh, basic human nature. So they love play. Occasionally some quarrel. But most cases, the parent, particularly the mother, provides affection, compassion. The children themselves doesn't care about the children's sort of social background or their family background. So long the children play together, showing affection. I think that these are the real human, express or very, very alive, basic human nature. Logically, we are social animal. So individuals' sort of happy life or successful life entirely depend on the rest of the community. So the rest of the community is source of our future, source of one individual's sort of, success or happiness. So we have to take, like farmer, take sort of farmland, more, maximum care. Not love the soil, but that is their future. Their income, money come from that soil. So similarly, individual happy life depend on other. So that others are basis or source of our fortune. So it's taking care of them. It's a more natural way, natural sort of way. I think artificial sort of thinking, I'm independent. I never depend on them. They're exploit, cheating, lying, bullying. Reality, long run, or cutting, or destroying, basis of our future. So humanism, basic human nature is more gentleness. Gentleness not come from dullness. Gentleness come from full alerted mind, sharp mind, more balanced with warm-heartedness. Then real human gentleness comes. So these not come from God or not come from sky or above, but come from within. So that's humanism. I think some sort of, because of the some way to look, that's it. Humanism. We are a social animal. It is bound to happen. Different views, different sort of interest. But still, these different people who have different sort of idea, different sort of interest, they are part of the humanity, part of the society. So there's no reason to killing each other, to bully each other. Even there are some differences, we have to talk. So that's the principle of non-violence. Non-violence does not mean non-violence, you should consider non-violence is signs of strength. Violence is a sign of desperate weakness. So there is a very rich human thinking, the concept of ahimsa.
Ascribe a positive meaning to something which you heretofore have ascribed a negative meaning to. You cannot help but get a different effect out of it. For in, again, each now moment, what you do is interpret from that blank set of props whether you, in that sense, will choose, perhaps sometimes not consciously, but now we are speaking of doing it consciously, to label it negative or positive. Now, we had said that it, in that sense, is in 3 steps. Step 1 in each now moment is your interpretation. Once you interpret something as either perhaps negative or positive, you then assume an attitude with that particular interpretation as a foundation. So therefore, again, to extrapolate, if you give a negative interpretation, you in general will assume a negative attitude or posture. If you give a positive interpretation, then in that sense you are more likely to assume a positive attitude. And lastly, you then act, you then do in the moment, right now, something with that interpretation and that attitude as a foundation. And it is ultimately the doing of that thing right now that creates your reality, that manifests your reality physically, because it is the actions that are the movers in that sense in your physical world right now. Therefore, you always in any given now moment have the opportunity, have the advantage to understand that you get to choose the interpretation. You get to choose. For regardless of whether or not, in that sense, you do consciously decide to choose or not, choose you will. Though perhaps if it is from a negative perspective, the choice will be somewhat automatic and unconscious. What we are discussing is the waking up in the now moment, the only time you ever exist. In any given situation, when you find yourself with, shall we say, an outdated interpretation, an interpretation that, oh no, here it comes again, for example, is a negative interpretation, presupposing that that is, in a sense, happening to you rather than from you. And when in that sense you say, oh no, here it comes, that is an interpretation with a negative, shall we say, backhand, and therefore can only result in a negative attitude, and then your actions will subtly or perhaps blatantly then manifest or represent that negative attitude. You can always, in that sense, take back your point of power. You can always, in that sense, create a, shall we say, gap or a lag or a pause between the interpretation and the action. For again, if your interpretation is, shall we say, negative, and in that sense you assume a negative attitude, but you then do nothing, you cannot then get the negative manifestation. It is the doing stage, in that sense, that creates the reality. So therefore, this gives you the liberty, the license to think whatever you wish, as long as you do not automatically then act with those thoughts as a foundation. Therefore, you can now begin to reinterpret according to preference. You can now understand, all right, something perhaps which in the past I have labeled negative is occurring. Obviously, I can see what is negative about it. In the past, when I have interpreted it this way, had my attitude, performed my actions, I have only gotten a negative result out of it. Therefore, I have absolutely nothing to lose by at least placing a pause before I do anything. And giving myself the opportunity, in that sense, to reinterpret from the perspective of a creator, of a conscious manifestor. And you can always reinterpret something which you had initially assigned a negative meaning or label to by asking yourself the simple wild card question. Wild card meaning you can pull it out of your deck anytime. How does this serve me exactly the way it is? In what way is this symbol that I have created of assistance to me? What is it, for instance, forcing me to look at? What is it, for instance, indicating about what I still may believe in a limiting sense? You can always, by simply asking, how is this of service to me exactly the way it is, get at least some negative, shall we say, alternative option. In other words, the positive. Some positive interpretation. For if you look at how it serves you, or what it, shall we say again, forces you in that sense to look at, you can then simply consciously derive that service or consciously choose to look at what you have created a symbol to force you to look at because you wish to look at it, and then no longer need the symbol to prod you from behind. The now moment is truly your point of power, for it is eternal. It always was right now. Never was there a time where you could say it is not right now. And in that sense, so that shall by extension continue. It will always eternally be now. So therefore, there is no path that you need dig up, and in that sense be responsible for integrating every aspect of it in a tenuous and tortuous manner. For when in that sense you simply begin to derive your actions and your creatorhood from the now moment, you automatically will create any opportunity to bring up any limiting belief, which, yes, you may have bought into in your past, but it is not inherently the path itself that is important.
Please take the other road, please. Oh, here we go again. It is not immune to the consequences of the physical mind's acts and choices. Do not assume that it is. But it is close enough to unconditional love to forgive it and to keep giving you the benefit of the doubt. That's the relationship of your higher self. That's its job. To keep on guiding you no matter what. Because it is the vibration of unconditional love that the physical mind often refuses to allow itself to perceive. Through the belief systems it chooses to buy into that deny its truth to itself. So, higher self says, please, 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 know you are loved. Please, please, please allow me to love you. Please, please, please love yourself enough to know you're not alone in this. That you don't have to do it all. That you weren't designed to. You weren't expected to. Ever. Not once. Carry this burden by yourself. Let me be your guide because I am you. Become familiar with that portion of yourself. It is not detached, it is not separate, it is not aloof, it is not in its own realm unaware of what you are choosing to experience. It will also experience it in its own way. But nevertheless, will always overlook it and always urge you forward, or left, or back, or whatever is necessary. Translate to the physical mind is simply suddenly the urge to go back. The urge itself, the intuition itself, in the physical mind, is the condensation and capsulization of the entire explanation from the higher self, saying, if you go 3 steps back and then go to the left and go down the parallel road, then the bridge is up. But all the physical mind will get is the tug. That's how it translates in physical reality, because the physical mind is not capable of actually perceiving in the same way the higher self is, and doesn't have to know all the reasons why and how. All it needs to do is know that that's part of who you are and allow yourself to recognize that that is a communication and to follow it, and that you have received the information that you need because it's on the same wavelength of your joy, of your passion. Why? Because you say it is. And you flow with it and thus find out that it is. Or resist it for as long as you want. And keep walking on the same road until you get to the washed out bridge and go, oh, why didn't I listen to my intuition back there? Because you thought you were in charge, smarty. but you're not. Not you alone. You are in charge, but not you alone, physical mind. Physical mind, higher self. That's the you that's in charge. Both aspects of your being is the persona, not just the physical personality self. That's only a part of it. So if you want to know you're in charge, you have to behave like the whole you. And be willing to open up and receive and perceive in whatever way it works for you, the dialogue and the communication coming from the portion of yourself that is the higher self, that has the higher point of view, that has the bigger picture. And be willing to understand it's working on your behalf. It's not going to trick you. It's not going to deceive you. The only thing in your reality that can create the idea of tricks and deception is the physical mind's belief system, not the higher self. Because it is only in physical, three-dimensional reality that you can have the experience of a personality structure that can actually deny its own truth. So any tricks, any deception that you may be afraid of encountering can only actually be coming from the personality aspect that's actually afraid it's going to be deceived. That's the paradox. It can't come from the higher self because that's a bigger picture point of view. And it can clearly see the road. And there is no reason, there is no logic for the higher self to go, yeah, take the left road. Watch and see how my lower self falls into the river. This ought to be fun. Oops, I went with it. You are under the assumption that the higher self is immune from what you experience in physical reality. Incorrect. You are one being, and the higher self will suffer the slings and arrows that the physical mind shoots itself with. You are one being. And it is not detached from you. And it is not immune to the consequences of the physical mind's choices. But because the higher self is closer to the vibration of unconditional love, it will overlook it. Again and again and again and again. Attempting to unconditionally loving you, reminding you, please take the other road, please. Oh, here we go again. It is not immune to the consequences of the physical mind's acts and choices. Do not assume that it is. But it is close enough to unconditional love to forgive it. And to keep giving you the benefit of the doubt. That's the relationship of your higher self. That's its job. To keep on guiding you no matter what. Because it is the vibration of unconditional love that the physical mind often refuses to allow itself to perceive. Through the belief systems it chooses to buy into that deny its truth to itself. So, higher self says, please, 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 please know you are loved. Please, please, please allow me to love you. Please, please, please love yourself enough to know you're not alone in this. That you don't have to do it all. That you weren't designed to. You weren't expected to. Ever. Not once. Carry this burden by yourself. Let me be your guide because I am you. Become familiar with that portion of yourself. It is not detached. It is not separate. It is not aloof. It is not in its own realm unaware of what you are choosing to experience. It will also experience it in its own way. But nevertheless, will always overlook it and always urge you forward, or left, or back, or whatever is necessary. At all. You have asked us, how do we travel from star to star? And we have explained to you, we don't travel from star to star. We're simply here, then we're simply there. The logical mind boggles. But how did you get there? How is it possible to go from here to there without stepping on all the places in between? That's not rational. That's not logical. Yes, it is from a different point of view. I'm talking about not abandoning logic. I'm talking about higher logic. The logic that comes from standing on the mountaintop where you can see the entire valley, the entire network, and where it makes sense to you on the mountaintop to say, if you actually go back 3 steps and then to the left, you're actually going to get there more quickly than if you just go straight ahead. Whereas down in the valley, the logical mind self is going, but everyone knows the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. If I go backwards, how can I get there sooner than if I go forward? How? And the higher self goes, because I can see that if you go forward there, the bridge is out. And if you take 3 steps back and go to the left, you go on a parallel road where the bridge is fine. But the point is that the language of the higher self cannot always communicate all those specifics to the physical mind, because the physical mind does not always have the capacity for that kind of translation. The only way that dialogue, most often than not from the higher self, translates to the physical mind is simply suddenly the urge to go back. The urge itself, the intuition itself, in the physical mind is the condensation and encapsulation of the entire explanation from the higher self, saying, if you go 3 steps back and then go to the left and go down the parallel road, then the bridge is up. But all the physical mind will get is the tug. That's how it translates in physical reality, because the physical mind is not capable of actually perceiving in the same way the higher self is, and doesn't have to know all the reasons why and how. All it needs to do is know that that's part of who you are, and allow yourself to recognize that that is a communication, and to follow it, and that you have received the information that you need, because it's on the same wavelength of your joy, of your passion. Why? Because you say it is. And you flow with it, and thus find out that it is. Or resist it for as long as you want, and keep walking on the same road until you get to the washed out bridge and go, oh, why didn't I listen to my intuition back there? Because you thought you were in charge, smarty. But you're not. Not you alone. You are in charge, but not you alone, physical mind. Physical mind, higher self, that's the you that's in charge. Both aspects of your being is the persona, not just the physical personality self. That's only a part of it. So if you want to know you're in charge, you have to behave like the whole you. And be willing to open up and receive and perceive, in whatever way it works for you, the dialogue and the communication coming from the portion of yourself that is the higher self, that has the higher point of view, that has the bigger picture. And be willing to understand it's working on your behalf. It's not going to trick you. It's not going to deceive you. The only thing in your reality that can create the idea of tricks and deception is the physical mind's belief system, not the higher self. Because it is only in physical, three-dimensional reality that you can have the experience of a personality structure that can actually deny its own truth. So any trick, any deception that you may be afraid of encountering can only actually be coming from the personality aspect that's actually afraid it's going to be deceived. That's the paradox. It can't come from the higher self because that's a bigger picture point of view. And it can clearly see the road. And there is no reason, there is no logic for the higher self to go, yeah, take the left road. Watch and see how my lower self falls into the river. This ought to be fun. Oops, I went with it. You are under the assumption that the higher self is immune from what you experience in physical reality. Incorrect. You are one being, and the higher self will suffer the slings and arrows that the physical mind shoots itself with. You are one being, and it is not detached from you, and it is not immune to the consequences of the physical mind's choices. But because the higher self is closer to the vibration of unconditional love, it will overlook it again and again and again and again, attempting to unconditionally loving you, reminding you, please take the other road, please. Oh, here we go again. It is not immune to the consequences of the physical mind's acts and choices. Do not assume that it is. But it is close enough to unconditional love to forgive it and to keep giving you the benefit of the doubt. That's the relationship of your higher self. That's its job.
Men, in you the people have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Associated with, okay? So in that case, when you exponentiate, you're going to, now when you do a Taylor expansion, you'll notice that you're going to have the Taylor expansion involving 3x3 matrices. So the algebra is going to be less trivial because you're going to have products of matrices and each matrix is 3x3. So now the algebra is going to be more complicated, but at the end of the day, when you do all the algebra, what you're going to get, you know, you're going to get, this is what you're going to get, and I'll explain what this means, you know. So notice that because now I have three angles, I have angle number 1, angle number 2, and angle number 3. Now I'm going to have theta is what I call the norm of the angle, because now, imagine that, now I have three angles. With these three angles, I can make, imagine you can make a vector. The first component is theta 1, the second component is theta 2, The third component is theta 3. So the Euclidean norm of that vector is the square root of the sum of the squares. So this is what I mean by the norm angle, the theta angle here. So it's what I mean here, this angle here, because I have 3 axes. So overall, I'm going to have a rotation around this axis, which is really the combination of those 3 axes. And I have a net rotation, a net angle theta. So by theta, I mean the net rotation of involving theta 1, theta 2, theta 3. And this hat here, remember the notation is when you have a unit vector. You remember, when you take the components of your vector and you divide by the norm of your vector. So the norm of this vector is a unit vector. You know, it's just a normalization of your vector, you know. So notice that because now the generators do not commute, those matrices do not commute, the product of the matrices, x1 times x2 is not the same thing as x2 times x3. Now we're going to have something very subtle. Now the exponential, remember that if these were numbers, we know how to take the product of exponential. You just add the entries. But because these are matrices, this is a matrix, this is a matrix, and this is a matrix, the product of this exponential is not going to be given by the exponential of the sum. You have to be very, very careful. This is what is called the Baker-Campbell-Hausser formula. In the next slide, I'll talk about that. But notice that when I work this out and I do all the algebra, what I'm going to get is this. Okay? So I'm going to have cosine theta. By theta means the norm of the angle, of the net angle, the unit matrix. I'm going to have the product of theta 1 times theta 2. And I'm going to have this. So what does it mean physically? So you're going to have along the diagonal, you're going to have a cosine theta times 1, because the unit matrix is made out of 1, 1, 1 along the diagonal. You have cosine theta, because this is the second element along the diagonal. Cosine theta is the third element along the diagonal. When you look at this term here, I'm going to have 1 minus cosine theta, which is have here 1 minus cosine theta. So when the matrix element is 1, when I combine 1 with 2, I have this is the matrix element, which is the 1, 2 matrix element, which is phi 1 times phi 2. Here I have phi 1, phi 3 because the matrix entry is the 1, 3 matrix entry, you know. Here I have 2, 1 because it's the matrix entry is the 2, 1 matrix entry. Here I have 2, 3, 3, 1, 3, 2. And here, when I have phi 1, I have phi square. This is the matrix element, the 2, 2 matrix element is, so I get this. This is the 3, 3 matrix element, so this is what I get. And finally, I have this combination here. This is the most subtle term. Remember when you take vector products, remember when you took the vector product, remember when you take the vector product of, remember when you study vector analysis, vector calculus, you have the scalar product of 2 vectors compared to the vector product of, you know. So when you have, this is all, by the way, this is in your book. Yeah, this is in the book, yeah. So imagine you take the, I guess I can write here. Let me see. Remember, when you take vector number 1, vector number 2, remember you take the epsilon symbol. Remember 1, 2, 3. This is the cross product. You know. Remember this is when you take the cross product of vectors. Remember A cross B gives you a vector, right? So by the epsilon symbol, remember what it meant is the yes, the permutation symbol, the epsilon. Remember when the permutation is even, it's a +1. When the permutation is odd, it's -1. And when the entries are repeated, you get a 0. Okay? So 1, 2, 3 is a positive permutation, it's an even permutation. So you get a +1. So this is why you get a 3 here. And we know that, you know, when you take the cross product of this unit vector with this vector here, you generate this vector. Remember, when you use the thumb rule of vectors? So when you take the cross product of the vector along the x-axis with the unit vector along the y-axis, you generate the vector. The rule of thumb, remember? So this is why you're going to end up having this term here. You know, this is what it means. I have vector number 1 with vector number 2. The cross product is going to give me vector number 3. And this is why you get this phi 3. Here, for example, okay, you're going to have vector number 1 with vector number 3 is going to give you vector number 2. For example, when you have 2...
Selecting the symbols, whether that be a bird language or a computer code, then you might be wondering, well, how can reality at the smallest scale be a language? Who would recognize the meaning of the symbols? Who would choose the syntactical freedom in the language? And so that's an interesting problem. Nobel laureate Frank Wilczek said, the relevant literature, and he was talking about the meaning of quantum theory, is famously contentious and obscure. I believe it will remain so until someone constructs, within the formalism of quantum mechanics, an observer. That is, a model entity whose states correspond to a recognizable character of conscious awareness. And Andre Linde, co-pioneer of inflationary Big Bang theory, said, will it not turn out, with the further development of science, that the study of the universe and the study of consciousness will be inseparably linked, and that ultimate progress in the one will be impossible without progress in the other? One of the last titans of physics, John Wheeler, said, the physical world has at bottom, a very deep bottom in most instances, an immaterial source and explanation. That which we call reality arises in the last analysis from the posing of yes or no questions. All things physical are information theoretic in origin, and this is a participatory universe. So we're conjecturing here. This is about plausible ideas, and even when a plausible idea seems fantastical, like the idea of the Big Bang, or a very popular idea being discussed now, even in academic level physics, that reality is actually a simulation in some computer in another universe. These ideas need to be seriously questioned, critically thought about, and not thrown out the window just because they seem outrageous, as the Big Bang itself seemed absolutely outrageous at one point. So let us then discuss how in the world there can possibly be a language as the substrate of reality without some notion of a chooser in the language and an actualizer of the meaning of these geometric symbols, because there needs to be something to interpret or actualize meaning in order to say that information exists. Now, if we like, we can just say, well, we'd like to start with the axiom that God exists. But that's not what science is about. Science is about going deeper and constantly questioning where that comes from and going all the way down to the bottom. So God may or may not exist, but if he does, I want to know, how does he exist? And so we don't need to make it religious. We can say, all right, well, abstractly, maybe there's this kind of universal collective consciousness. It's not like a human consciousness. Maybe it's more like the Force in Star Wars. Maybe it's more like Qi in Chinese medicine. We don't know what it's like, but we need something that is everywhere and that may be the substrate of everything and that is capable of actualizing this geometric information that we conjecture and making the syntactical choices in this mosaic tiling language in 3D that we are working with here at Quantum Gravity Research. So, what do we know about the universe? How does it behave? Well, everybody can agree that emergence is the name of the game. Quarks and electrons self-organize into 81 stable atoms. Those 81 atoms self-organize into countless chemical compounds, including the proteins necessary for life, DNA. Single-celled organisms emerge eventually in a biosphere, and then groups of single-celled organisms, each specializing in a different function, like workers in a big city, team up to form larger structures, such as animals. Eventually, some animal comes along that is so exquisitely good at choosing and assessing meaning and being creative that we label that animal as being conscious, such as a human being. So now this mysterious notion of consciousness is admitted to be real and clearly emerges from the laws of physics, is allowed by the laws of physics. Then we can ask, well, is this the end of the road? Is human consciousness the epitome of self-organization in this universe? Or does it go beyond? And just as single-celled organisms team up in the human body to allow high-level human consciousness to emerge and float upon an ocean of their existence, is it possible that large numbers of human consciousnesses can self-organize and allow for an even greater consciousness to emerge? And for that matter, since a typical human has 150 pounds of mass energy that is self-organized into their consciousness of their mind-body system, what is the upper limit of the percentage of mass energy in the universe that can self-organize to form conscious systems and systems of conscious systems that are conscious as well? Well, as far as we know, there is no upper limit other than 100%. So technically, with physics as we know it, all matter, energy in the universe can theoretically self-organize into a conscious system, a network of conscious systems that is conscious. That's our best shot at thinking through the scientific plausibility of how some mysterious collective consciousness...
Passport. Do animals need passports?
Have you finished?
It's in code that in this atomic age of speed, we are shut in and shut out by passports.
If you'll shut up and let somebody else talk...
And free speech, does that exist?
No, you've got it all.
And free enterprise.
We were talking of passports.
Today it's all monopoly.
All right. Now will you...
Can I go into the automobile business and compete with the auto trust?
If I can get in a word...
Not a chance. Can I go into the grocery business and compete with the chain stores?
Will you shut up?
Not a chance. Monopoly is the menace of free enterprise. As I look back 60 years ago...
Where were you 60 years ago?
He was a glint in his great-grandfather's eye.
Very well now. Have you finished? Now let me say something. Let me tell you how wrong you are. In the first place... In the first place... Now I've forgotten what I wanted to say.
And the atomic bomb.
Ah.
It's a crime that when the world cries for atomic energy, you want to make atomic bombs.
Me? I'm against atomic bombs.
You want to wipe out civilization, destroy all life on this planet. You still think you're living in the night?
I lost my throne because I didn't want atomic bombs.
You and your kind think that atomic bombs can solve your problem?
Listen, you little rat.
Today, man has too much power. The Roman Empire collapsed with the assassination of Caesar. And why? Because of too much power. Feudalism blew up with the French Revolution. And why? Because of too much power. And today, the whole world will blow up. And why?
Because of too much power.
The monopoly of power is a menace to freedom. It degrades and victimizes every individual. And where is the individual?
I
become exponentially more powerful to the point where it becomes one of the defining characteristics of the universe and the destiny of the universe. So again, these are ideas that are fantastical and sound more like they should be in a science fiction book. And yet at the same time, they're absolutely reasonable, plausible, and do not violate anything that we know about today in physics. And in fact, are somewhat more related to some of the newer realizations about physics, such as the realization that the wormholes of space-time theory may very well be the quantum entanglement of non-local quantum theory. Now, the last idea is the idea of non-computability. So let's give an example. How many ways do you think 16 of your friends can be organized? You can get 16 people who you know into your kitchen, and you can start organizing them into groups, Linda and John. And you can reorder Linda and John to John and Linda. You write that down. That's 2 ways. And you can organize Linda, John, and Susan, right? So you can do these organizations. There's only 16 people. So how many ways can you arrange until you run out of ways? Your 16 friends. 22 trillion ways. Trillion with a T. If I added a 17th friend, it would explode that number to a shockingly larger number. So factorial mathematics and exponential mathematics is absolutely non-intuitive. Now, if you had 100 friends or 1,000 friends, the ways that you could order them, the combinatorics, would exceed the computational ability of a theoretical computer that one could build from all the mass energy in the universe and then give that computer an amount of time to calculate that solution or that number, say 1 trillion times the current age of the universe, and it still could not compute that. Quantum mechanics is about the combinatorics of interacting particles. So each particle has a wave function, and the wave functions relate to one another according to values called quantum damping and quantum resonance. And these can be computed with, say, 2 electrons. But once you get to a few more electrons, it becomes non-computable. And when you think about the quantum interactions of all quantum wave functions, so every group of particles has its own quantum wave function. So there's a quantum wave function for 1 electron in a body, and then there's another quantum wave function for a system of 3 electrons. There's a quantum wave function even for the universe. And all quantum wave functions physically interact in quantum mechanics to influence all other quantum wave functions. It's a network of quantum wave function interactions. And that is arguably the most fundamental thing of reality. It's the interaction, the relationship of things via their quantum wave function combinatorics. And so if that is the most fundamental thing of reality, and it is fundamentally non-computable, well, that's an interesting philosophy. It means we live in a universe that is fundamentally non-computable. You can compute the separate objects, but you cannot compute the emergent combinatorics of the objects. And it's those emergent combinatorics that is the deepest thing with our deepest theory. Our deepest theory may very well be quantum mechanics currently. And so that is a theory of interactions, interactions that are in principle in a finite universe non-computable. So the very stuff, the very most elemental stuff of reality is this non-computable result. And so consciousness itself is likely non-computable. Because again, if 16 friends have 22 trillion ways that you can order them, imagine the atoms in a single neuron within your brain. There are countless billions of atoms in one neuron, and they all are interacting quantum mechanically. And that interaction describes the emergent behavior of the electromagnetic connections and all of the emergent physics of chemistry that come after the quantum interactions. So it's mysterious that this non-computable stuff is likely the most fundamental stuff and that it cannot be computed. It's interesting that consciousness itself is non-computable. Although there are people today, serious people, trying to simulate consciousness, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, because if consciousness is a system of particles and the particles are fundamentally the quantum interactions of the wave functions of every combination of particles, it cannot be computed. So it may be a naive attempt, but perhaps they'll come up with something interesting. Now, let us play along and suppose that if the code theoretic axiom is true, that reality is based on a code, we can ask a question. We can say, is it an efficient code? Or is it just some arbitrarily inefficient code that's not maximally efficient? So to give us clues on that answer, we can look to really fundamental things about physics and nature. And one of the most fundamental things is the principle of least action from classic physics. And the principle of least action essentially says that for nature to do something, she
never consider myself as something special. If I consider myself something different from you, like I'm Buddhist, even more I'm His Holiness Dalai Lama, or even consider I'm Dr. Moran. Actually, you treat yourself as a prisoner. I look at these things, I simply consider is the ultimate source of satisfaction within ourselves. If you do wrong things, mainly harming others, you get negative consequences. If you do helping others, bring more happiness to others, you get benefit. More inner strength there, and more sort of confidence of purpose of life and fulfillment about that purpose, then you always feel happy. When we are young, very much sort of alive, these inner value. And we grown up, particularly the society where not much talking about these values. only talks when we read newspaper or television, sports or money, a number of dollars, like that. And all the advertising, some because of the material values. No one telling, no one sort of explaining the importance of warm-heartedness.
Despite this, he says there is a lot to be happy about if we only look in the right places.
Early part of 20th century, later part of 20th century, much positive change took place. I think world, yes, there is a lot of crisis, a lot of bad things, but also is a lot of good things.
And yet, we have been taught to fear anyone and everyone, a reality, he says, that is impacting one of the fundamentals of human happiness.
So, we are a social animal. Therefore, friendship is very essential. Friendship comes trust. Fear and trust go contradiction. More fear there cannot develop trust. With fear, how can develop friendship?
It's little wonder then that loneliness has become the #1 cause of depression in the West.
And a big city, a lot of people, but just think oneself, self-centered attitude, and no idea or sense of love. Then, too much competitive sense. Then jealousy. Jealousy brings distrust. Distrust brings frustration. So therefore, and fear. Then the lonely feeling automatically comes. So lonely feeling is not creation of environment, but creation of your own mental attitude.
But the thought leader says there is hope if only we could seek a slightly different goal.
I think eventually we can develop more deeper sort of the experience about our life. Make some kind of pledge. Now on, I must make a new person. Same body, but new person.
Your Holiness, I have to thank you so much. I have learned much from meeting you today. I have learned, for instance, that we're all on the same road.
Yes.
With the ultimate goal.
That's right.
But we're all different travelers.
And also same experience of gas.
I don't think I'll ever forget this day.
Hi, I'm Mike Warsman, founder of A Million Smiles. To join our journey, please subscribe to our YouTube channel below and check us out on Facebook. And while you're there, you might like to leave a comment on your thoughts on Buddhism and happiness. Are they a match made in heaven or something else? And as always, please share this video with 10 friends who you think might get a smile out of it. Until next time, stay happy.
But to get the reverse picture, you have first of all to get clearly its opposite one, namely that the existence of any one minute little thing is intimately related to everything. And then what happens when you clearly understand that, and you've really got that, your mind does a flip, like that. You know, it's like when you squeeze the air in a sausage balloon, and you get all the air squeezed up, you think, into one end of the balloon, and suddenly it goes bloop, and it comes out the other end, you see? Well, it's sort of like that. And you have to be very careful at that point not to go crazy. Because you see, when you find out that all this universe depends on you, some people get frightened, others get cocky, and from both things, disasters can follow. you have to discover that and then be natural. Act as if nothing happened. So then this Buddhist idea, Mahayana Buddhist idea of mutual interpenetration is expressed by the great simile of the net of jewels, in which you have a multidimensional spider's web in the morning dew, and on inspecting one dewdrop you see the reflections of all the others, and in each reflection, in turn, the reflections of all the others, and again, and again, and again. And so, of course, one discovers this to be no mere philosophical fancy, no mere metaphor, when you start working with laser beams and finding out that you can reconstruct a whole photograph from a tiny snip out of the negative. Because the crystalline structure of the whole photographic field, the chemicals spread over the acetate or whatever, when it's exposed to light, all those crystals change in harmony with each other. See, supposing we all touch each other, and then somebody says boo, we'll all jump a little bit together. And if you examine any one jump carefully enough, any one individual jumping, you will see, if you can find out enough about it, that the way he did it was in response to the ones next to him, and they did it in response to the ones next to them, and they jumped so far because they couldn't push any further, and some were a little bit pulled in their jump, and so on. And by seeing exactly what one of them did, you could reconstruct what all of them were doing. Only usually we don't bother to think about things like that, because it takes too long. And this is one of our great difficulties as human beings, that the mode of thinking upon which we largely rely for our practical calculations is unbelievably clumsy, because it can only deal with one thing at a time. And that doesn't get you anywhere. That's in a way why a great deal of scientific work is apt to be trivial. It's all very well if I had all that time to think it out. But I don't. I have to make practical decisions in a hurry. And no time. But on the other hand, here is nature. Here is your body. Not merely your body by itself as something bounded by the skin, but your body in relationship to a whole community of people and animals and bugs and vegetables, functioning in this astonishing way, doing myriads of things all together everywhere at once, and not thinking about it at all. It is astonishing, you know, how we overlook that. Because, of course, this is a faculty which everybody possesses. And therefore we say, well, that sort of cleverness is a dime a dozen. What we like to distinguish is special cleverness. People who can do strange tricks, like great feats of thinking and talking, and intellectual and cerebral performance. But we mustn't forget that there are also people who do absolutely astonishing things without thinking at all. There are jugglers. There are very beautiful people. That's pretty astonishing when you pick out someone and saying, gee, isn't she gorgeous? And that's done without thinking. And it embarrasses many women to be told that they're beautiful, because they want to be admired for their intellectual achievements rather than for the bodies which their parents provided for them. And so we're a little bit on the defensive about the things that we achieve without our egos being in charge. But we do the most beautiful things that we do, really, by that means, because all that thought and intellectuality can do is it can embellish your natural talents. A lot of people who are incredibly good at thinking never do anything creative because they have no talent available. They may have it, but they don't know, they don't trust it, they don't know how to make use of it, and therefore their intellect works to little purpose. Because the function of the intellect is to be the servant of the organic intelligence.
From back, then you realize that deep down between self and other there is some sort of conspiracy. If these things always occur in combination and look very different from each other and feel quite different, nevertheless the feeling of difference between them allows each one to exist. And so underneath the opposition or the polarity between self and other, or between any other pair of opposites you can think of, there is something in common, as there is, for example, between figure and background. You can't see a figure without a background. You can't have an organism without an environment. Equally, you can't have a background without a figure, or an environment without organisms in it, or without things in it. You can't have space which is unoccupied by any solid. You cannot have solids not occupying some space. This is absolutely elementary, and yet we don't realize it. Because, for example, the average person thinks that space is nothing. That it's just a sort of not there-ness in which there are things. And we are slightly afraid that not there-ness, that nothingness, that darkness, that the negative poles of all these oppositions will win. That they will eventually swallow up every kind of being and every kind of there-ness. But when you catch on to the game, you realize that that won't happen. Because what is called not existing is quite incapable of being there without the contrast of something called existing. It's like the crest and the trough of a wave. You can't have a wave that is all trough and no crest, just as you can't have a wave which is all crest and no trough. Such a thing has never been manifested in the physical universe. They go together. And that is the secret. There really is no other secret than that. But it is thoroughly repressed. And therefore, we are all educated to feel that we've got to fight for the white because the black might win. We've got to survive. You must survive. That's the great thing we're all working under, and pounding it out day after day in anxiety. Because this is a description of anxiety. Anxiety is the fear that one of a pair of opposites might cancel the other. Forever. And if by any chance, by any means, you find out that that is not so, you have an entirely new attitude to what human beings are doing, which may be very creative, but which also may be very dangerous. You see through the game called white must win. Because you know that neither black nor white are going to win, because they belong to each other. So one of the problems of the various chemicals which can change the human mind in certain ways so that it becomes apparent that inside and outside go together is that they do rather give the show away, and people who take these chemicals and see through the human game cannot be trusted. They may decide to be good sports, and go back into the game and play it as if it were for real, or they may not. And if they don't, what's going to happen? Now, you see, what is, let me speak specifically for a moment. I said the subject of this is LSD. LSD is one such chemical that does produce this curious effect of making you aware of the polarity of things. It does lots of other things. It does lots of rather unessential and trivial things. And these, of course, in all the publicity in the various national magazines about LSD, get thoroughly emphasized. In other words, when somebody says something's real psychedelic, they mean bizarre. And when the national magazines try to illustrate the effect of these chemicals with various photographs, they come on with blurred photographs of all sorts of things higgledy-piggledy messed together. Naked girls seen through prisms. Well, that's absolutely nothing to do with it. If you wanted some sort of appropriate illustration for a Life magazine article on the effects of LSD, you would have one very simple solution. You would publish the most gorgeous color reproductions of Persian miniatures and of Moorish arabesques and of the illuminations of Celtic manuscripts. That would give you the story, so far as changes in human sensation are concerned. But there would be one thing very difficult to put across in pictures, because the people who looked at them, if they didn't get the point of view, wouldn't see it. And that is what I will call the sensation, as well as the intellectual understanding, of polarity. That is to say, that the inside and the outside, the subjective and the objective, the self and the other, go together. In other words, there is a harmony, an unbreakable harmony. When I'm using the word harmony, I don't necessarily mean something sweet. I mean absolute concordant relationship between what goes on inside your skin and what goes on outside your skin. It isn't that what goes on outside is so powerful that it pushes around and controls what goes on inside. Equally so, it isn't that what goes on inside is so strong that it often succeeds.
They're not antithetical in any way. The second one is basic, because that's the way you felt when you were a baby. You had what Freud calls the oceanic feeling. And you knew that you didn't have words to put it in, but you knew that you were this jazz, whatever it is that is. And you made no distinction between the knower and the known, the voluntary and the involuntary, the doing and the happening. It was just this jazz. You knew that perfectly well as a baby, but then they came and put it on you that you were different. See, they wanted you to be something particular. And well, so you learned that. Well, they put it on you so heavily that you forgot the first thing. So, but the whole point of sanity is to have them both at the same time. It's just the same as I described, the white paper behind the print, the mirror behind its reflections. Because if you don't get both going at the same time, you get a kind of myopia, of getting, not being able to see the forest for the trees, of forgetting your own origin. And if you forget that each one of you is an incarnation of God, if you don't know that, you will try to become God by effort, and therefore will become impossible, a demon, an aggressive, obstreperous nuisance. But if we all know that basically we are God, and I don't mean God in the grandfather sense, of the Judeo-Christian image, which is an idol, but in the sense that we can't define. See, you can't define yourself. Just like you can't bite your own teeth. You don't know who you are. And you know, all science of neurology is trying to go out and make out what is finally consciousness in here, what is the brain all about, and they don't know. There are people, most of all, who know they don't know. We don't know. Because each one of us is an aperture through which the universe is observing itself. But of course, it couldn't observe itself completely and totally, because that would be a bore. To understand absolutely, to be totally in control of everything, would be like screwing a plastic woman. Well, who wants that? See, always there needs to be an element of mystery. So the thing that is mysterious to itself. But not completely. Because if it were completely mysterious to itself, nothing would happen. That would be to everything being even. What we need is something odd. But we can't have something odd without the even. You know, that's the nature of the way it works, yang and yin. Next question. Yes. The question is whether it is possible for a Jew or a Christian to follow a yogic philosophy without abandoning the tradition. No, it is perfectly possible to put the two together. I am this weekend going to a community of nuns to show them how to practice Christian yoga. And this is entirely possible because it's perfectly obvious if you understand Jesus Christ as a historical figure. He was a realized person who knew that he was an incarnation of God in the same way as you are. Only he was embarrassed by the language of the religious tradition, which was the only one he knew. Because in the language of that tradition, to be the Son of God was to claim, like, I'm the boss's son. Because they had a boss image of God. Now, on the other hand, if he had been in India and he'd suddenly announced that he was the incarnation of God, everybody would have said, of course. We all are. And so likewise in China, the image there, you see, the Tao is not a boss image. Lao Tzu says the great Tao flows everywhere, both to the right and to the left. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. And when good things are accomplished, it lays no claim to them. So the image of the Tao and the image of the Brahman, the Atman Brahman behind the Hindu universe, is not something that gets up and says, bo, 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 bo. No? Has its back to the wall. But it's something invisible, subtle, always self-effacing. Now, however, there are grounds for this in Christianity. There is a passage in St. Paul's epistle to the Philippians, which I'm going to translate in a slightly different way from the King James. Let this state of consciousness be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being identical with God, thought not identity of God a thing to be clung to,
but emptied him.
That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Country. I mean, think of his mail and all the people who have to be employed sifting that out and assessing it, so that if he were someone quite anonymous and that we didn't have to think about it, he would be a very, very good ruler. In just the same way, for example, you don't have to attend, unless you're sick, to the government of your own body. It happens automatically. This is this expression run of itself, and it goes on day after day after day, and the better it is, the less you have to think about it. When you see well, you do not see your eyes. If there is something wrong with your eyes, you start seeing spots, and those spots are spots in your eyes. When you hear well, you'd never hear your ears. But when they start singing, you know, then you're starting to hear your ears, and your ears are getting in the way of their own hearing. So on the deepest level, a person as a whole can get in the way of his own existence by becoming too aware of himself. And then he lacks this quality. Now, the Taoists then propose that there be something to help people get back to Tao and to be able to be in a state of death, so that they wouldn't get in their own way. And this is connected with the idea of being empty. Emptiness, being somehow vacant, was the secret of the thing. The highest kind of knowledge is not know-how, but know-how, N-O-H-O-W. To be able to do it know-how, without any method. To achieve this, something is practiced which is called fasting the heart. The heart, in Chinese, is a word which doesn't mean heart in the physiological sense. You see, it's part of the De character. Shin. It's usually located about here, and it means heart-mind. It's equivalently translated as mind, and in all the Zen texts where the word mind is used, no mind, mushin, it is this character. The psychic center. Now, the best kind of heart is absence of heart. In English, the word heartless has a very bad connotation, as does the word mindless. A heartless person is an inconsiderate, unfeeling person. A mindless person is an idiot. But a person who has mushin, or no mind, or no heart in Chinese, is a very high order of person. It means that his psychic center doesn't get in its own way. It operates as if it wasn't there. Zhuangzi says that the highest form of man uses his shin like a mirror. It grasps nothing, it refuses nothing, it receives but does not keep. And the poem says when the geese fly over the water, and they are reflected in the water, that the geese do not intend to cast their reflection, and the water has no mind to retain their image. So, the whole thing is, you see, to operate in the world as if you were absent. Now, this is built into us physiologically, fundamentally. Let me ask you simply, what is the color of your head from the standpoint of your eyes? Your eyes don't see your head, do they? You look all around, you see everything else, but your head you don't see. Do you feel that your head is black? No. Hasn't any color at all. Outside, you see your field of vision is an oval, two eyes, and this creates a sort of two centers of an ellipse. So there's this whole field of vision. Now, experiment. What is beyond the field of vision? What color is it where you can't see? It isn't black. This is an important point. It's no color at all beyond there. And in this way, you can get an idea of what is meant by that character that I discussed this morning, Xuan, which although it formally has the meaning of darkness, this one, although it formally has the meaning of darkness and the deep and the obscure, it actually refers to this kind of no color, which is the color of your head, so far as your eyes are concerned. Now, so in this sense, the invisibility of one's head, almost the not having of any head at all, is the secret of being alive. To be headless, you might say, to have no head, in just the sense I'm talking about, is our way of talking about the Chinese expression, mushin, no mind. Now, as a matter of fact, if you want to see the inside of your head, all you have to do is keep your eyes open. Because everything that you're experiencing in the external visual field is a state of your brain. All these colors and shapes are the way in which the brain nerves translate the electrical impulses in the external world.
You and your kind think that atomic bombs can solve your problem?
Listen, you little rat.
Today, man has too much power. The Roman Empire collapsed with the assassination of Caesar. And why? Because of too much power. Feudalism blew up with the French Revolution. And why? Because of too much power. And today, the whole world will blow up. And why?
Because of too much power.
The monopoly of power is a menace to freedom. It degrades and victimizes every individual. And where is the individual?
I don't know.
Lost in terror, because he's made to hate instead of love. If civilization is to survive, we must combat power until the dignity and peace of man are restored.
Self-organization of systems that one might choose to label as conscious in the electromagnetic spectrum of space. And that is a wild idea as well, because photons can move at the speed of light. And when you move at the speed of light, you experience, according to special
of talking about distances between bodies. In other words, when we say the distance between them increased, as if the distance were a substantive that does something, like the man walked, the distance increased. But I suppose what we're actually saying is that the two bodies we're talking about increased the distance between themselves. They did it. But then you suddenly find that you've got distance as an object. They increased the distance now being the object of the verb, whereas before it was the substance, the subject. And so at once one begins to see there's something fishy about space. And after all, it is the background against which we see everything. And even a blind person has a sense of space in that which does not obstruct motion. And yet, funny thing about space is that in a way it doesn't end where a solid begins. You can shift a solid around in space without apparently altering it in any way. And after all, there is space between the two sides, shall we say, or ends of the solid. We can think of that in terms of space and measure it in terms of space. But it is against space that we experience everything that we experience. And by the way, also, we experience everything not only in the dimension of space, but also in the dimension of time. And the fascination about space and time is that while they are basic to all possible experiences that we have, you just can't put your finger on them. Space seems to be completely immaterial. And when St. Augustine was asked what is time, he said, I know what it is, but when you ask me, I don't. So these two basic dimensions of our physical world are uncommonly elusive. We could perhaps say that they are pure abstractions. There is no such thing as space, and there is no such thing as time. They are merely our way of measuring and thinking about the behavior of the physical universe as a pattern, a system of patterns, energy patterns. And if you measure the movement of these patterns, the line along which you measure motion is called the timeline. If you measure their positions, the line along which you measure their positions you would call the space line. And these two lines would be as abstract as the equator in relation to longitude 0. These things don't exist on the physical face of the world. They are imaginary lines and are only to be found on maps. Could you also say that the same thing was true of time and space? We think, for example, that there are 3 coordinates of space and 1 of time. The 3 coordinates of space being length, breadth, and depth. And through that runs 1 of time. But come to think of it, it's rather artificial. It is making us think of space as having a sort of grain to it, as if it were a crystalline substance. And however transparent the crystal, it does have a grain. And space has the grain of up, across, and through. Those are the 3 ways in which we think of space. And we can't think of any more. Not with our senses. We can mathematically conceive spaces with infinitely many dimensions. That is to say, you can write it down as if it were so, but you can't conceive it in your imagination. You can draw, it's great fun to draw, a 4-dimensional cube having 4 spatial dimensions. It's called a tesseract. And tesseract is a good word to apply to a person who is ultimately square. 4-dimensional square. But the tesseract, you see the minute you draw it, that obviously you can't have more than the 3 right-angular dimensions of space, or the coordinates, in any kind of solid figure that you know. And so you can think about it in terms of mathematics, but you can't conceive more than these 3 coordinates sensuously. And so we begin, it's basic common sense to us that space has this structure. But of course, the question is this a structure of space? Or is it a structure of the human nervous system, the human brain, and human thought, which is projected onto the external world as a tool for measuring it? This is one way of approaching the problem. But there's another way altogether, which is to consider space as anything but nothing. If space is basic to all that we experience, as time is, you might say then that space is as near as we can imagine to being the ground of the world, or what some people have called God. The texts of the Hindus, Buddhists, and Taoists are full of ways in which the symbol of space is used to mean the ultimate
just before it faded. After several minutes, during which his mind returned to its normal state, he looked at what he had written. And there upon the paper was the following immensely profound observations. Everything in this universe is the smell of burnt almonds. I suppose that all sensible and hard-headed people would agree that this is just the sort of inanity to which all these mystical revelations ultimately boil down. In the clear, cold light of rational consciousness, seemingly inspired and utter convincing knowledge of dreams, of drug delusions, and of mystical experiences comes down to just this sort of idiotic anticlimax. Asked in the poetic or exotic obscurantism of such phrases as all is Brahman or the divine unity beneath the multiplicity of the world, it may sound for a moment as if it meant something. But the essential nonsense of these feelings and the purely subjective character of the sense of insight which they involve at once becomes obvious when Brahman, the divine unity, is replaced by the smell of burnt almonds. We might settle for this conclusion if some of us had not had the same sensation, not under drugs or hypnosis, but when very wide awake. And I, for one, will not quarrel with the smell of burnt almonds as the key to the mystery. I like it much better and feel it makes much more sense than Brahman, the divine. For its very banality, its very consequential silliness, brings out the real significance of the experience in question. For the importance of the mystical revelation does not lie in the precise nature of what everything in this universe is. It can be God or Brahman or burnt almonds or applesauce or anything you like. Its importance lies rather in the simple sensation of wholeness, in the part of the sentence which runs, everything in this universe is, no matter what. For the conviction which has come to the experiencer is that his habitual sensation of isolation from his environment, from the rest of the world, is an illusion, and that as a corollary, his own deeds and misdeeds, fortunes and misfortunes, are the same process as the changing seasons and the circling stars. And unreasonable as it may seem, this gives him the sensation that his whole life, past, present, and future, is somehow perfectly natural and in order, and that he himself is not just the mind enclosed in the skull, but the total process of the world. The significance of this experience does not, I think, lie in any consequences or conclusions which might be drawn from it. It is not an important experience in the sense that it is useful for some other purpose. It's simply like playing or listening to music, which is obviously phony in the very moment that we do it for some ulterior motive, such as to appear cultured or to convey an ideological message. Its significance for human beings is not like that of, say, the second law of thermodynamics, but like that of